So the righteous suffer and sin sometimes it's in the camp. You think about a passage like Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7 through 11. And in Hebrews 12, it says, God chastises us, and that's proof that we're his children. In fact, if we don't suffer chastisement or discipline, the Hebrews writer says, of which all children undergo, then it proves that we're, the old King James has bastards here. Newer translations go with illegitimate sons. But the point is, if we're never chastised by God, if we never endure hardship, that's proof that we don't belong to God. Look at Exodus 32:11 and how Moses leans on the divine reputation of God. Verse 11, Moses implored the Lord his God and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people who you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains and consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they will inherit it forever." And notice verse 14. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he spoke of bringing on his people. Moses says, hey, you don't want the Egyptians to get a bad rap about you and say you couldn't bring your people. You got a reputation out here, God. And God hears that, and God says, you know what? I'm not going to destroy them because of my reputation and because of, I don't want the Egyptians to get the wrong idea about me. Does God get a benefit from how we live? Yes. There's another passage. They'll go to Numbers 14. Numbers 14, another occasion with Israel being disobedient. God sends the 12 spies in there. Only ones that come back with the faithful reporter, Joshua and Caleb. Notice Numbers 14 and verse 13, though. Moses again intercedes for the people, but he leans on the reputation of God. Numbers 14 and verse 13, Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it, because God says he wants to strike them. That's verse 12. Moses says, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for you brought up this people in your might from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land, they have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of your people. For you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them, and a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard your fame will say, verse 16, it's because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to give them, that he killed them in the wilderness. And now, please let the power of the Lord be great, as you have promised, saying, the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Please pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt till now. Moses tells God not to destroy the Israelites. Why?
Because of his reputation.
And then inhabitants of the nations, verse 16, gonna hear it, and the Egyptians, and this isn't gonna be good. Does God get benefit when we obey? Eliphaz says, does man profit God? Yes, man profits God. This is one proof. Last passage, Ephesians chapter 3. Ephesians chapter 3, and this is about the church. And Paul says some things that ought to give us pause for how we live, but also God's reputation, the divine reputation. Ephesians 3, beginning with verse 7, of this gospel I was made a minister, according to the gift of God's grace, which was given me by the working of his power. Ephesians 3, verse 8 says, to me, though I am the very least of all the saints, this grace was given to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to bring to light for everyone what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God, who created all things, so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Look at Ephesians 3:10. He says that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to rulers and authorities where? In the heavenly places.
Heavenly places.
Church is God's bragging rights in the heavenly arena. In the heavenly realm, God gets to point down at you and me and say, nobody else can do that. I brought black and white, male and female, rich and poor, man and woman, boy and girl together in one family. And we are his bragging rights in the heavenly arena, and his manifold or diversified glory, his manifold wisdom, his diversified wisdom is shown through the church. And so when Eliphaz says to Job in Job 22 and verse 2, can a man be profitable to God? Does God care about any man? The answer is yes. And Eliphaz is wrong about that. He feels that God doesn't profit from anybody. God doesn't really care what we do, but God does. Then he has a sarcastic remark in verse 4. He tells Job, God wouldn't be after you like this if you were upright. God doesn't put the upright through troubles and discipline of any kind. Look at verse 4. Is it for your fear of him that he reproves you and enters into judgment with you? Eliphaz is saying, hey, if you were right, you wouldn't be suffering. God didn't put the righteous into trouble. Is that true or false? If Job was righteous, Eliphaz says Job wouldn't be suffering because God doesn't enter into judgment, or God doesn't deal with the righteous people this way. Is this true or false?
False. Because Job is the characteristic of it.
He's the epitome of righteousness. That's right.
Wait a minute. Y'all don't understand. And so therefore, if we suffer with him, we should also reign with him.
That's right.
We must understand our suffering is to the benefit and to the glory of God. It's not to just ourselves. It does make us, it sharpens our focus and our trust in him. He's promised, he that is faithful that promised. And so we have to realize that no matter what we go through, God is with us. God never will leave us nor forsake us. We know those scriptures. That's the same thing. And when you brought out this, the first part, when Joshua had to deal with it, when he went into Ai, they were, because of sin. He pleaded just like Moses did. Lord, you're going to give in to what everybody said. But God said something. He said, get up, stop weeping and moaning and all that. There's sin in the king. So you got to be able to deal with the sin. He said, if you don't deal with it, I can no longer be with you.
Yeah, so the righteous suffer and sin sometimes is in the camp. You think about a passage like Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7 through 11. And in Hebrews 12, it says, God chastises us, and that's proof that we're his children. In fact, if we don't suffer chastisement or discipline, the Hebrews writer says, of which all children undergo, then it proves that the old King James has bastards here. Newer translations go with illegitimate sons. But the point is, if we're never chastised by God, if we never endure hardship, that's proof that we don't belong to God, not that we do. Eliphaz is saying, well, if you really belong to God, you wouldn't be enduring suffering. But Eliphaz is wrong. And then notice in verse 5 down through verse 11, the things he starts saying about Job. He starts discussing all the bad things that he knows that Job has done. And verse 5, he says Job is evil and his evil is abundant. You see that? Verse 5. Then in verse 6, he says Job gave loans out at unrealistic cost and interest. Do you see that? He's saying, hey, Job. First, the friends were saying to Job, what? Listen, they were saying, Job, tell us what you what?
What you did.
Tell us what you did. And Job, you need to do what? What were they saying? You need to
repent, restore, restitution.
At first they were just throwing shots. Now Eliphaz is like, I figured it out. I know exactly what you did. You're wicked and abundant in evil, verse 5. Verse 6, you've given out these loans at these crazy interest rates. Verse 7, he says, you have not taken care of the hungry or the thirsty. Verse 8, you've abused your power because you trusted in it. Verse 9, you've overlooked the needy and the widow. Look at verse 9. You've sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless were crushed. And then in verse 10 and 11, he says, that's why darkness came upon you, Job. So Eliphaz goes from, hey, maybe you sinned and you did some stuff you shouldn't have, to now Eliphaz is saying, no, I know exactly what you did. I know your specific sins. You're abundant in evil. You charge people crazy interest. You didn't take care of the hungry or the thirsty. Verse 8, you abuse your power because you trusted in it. You overlook the widows in verse 9, and that's why darkness has come upon you. My thinking is, if you knew all of this, why didn't you say it the first time you started talking in chapter 4? Why are you waiting until now to tell Job you figured out his sins? The ironic thing is, in Job 31, Job is going to talk about his righteous pedigree and character, and it's going to directly contrast all of this. Job did take care of the needy more than anybody. Job didn't lend out money at interest. Job supported and cared for the poor. Job confessed his sin. It's going to be the exact opposite. But in frustration now, Eliphaz is just saying anything.